figure out my cuts. So the first cut for if you're taking the cape to mount it, be up the back leg to the point of the shoulder, then straight back across the body, and then we're gonna cut around here to about where the sternum is. So the sternum's right here. You can feel where the sternum is. You can draw a line straight up the back of the front leg, staying out of the armpit, up to this, where past the point of the shoulder. So it'd be like center shoulder, straight back. So you can see that's gonna be my lines. And then from the base of the antlers, we're gonna make a Y cut, and then all the way down the back to here. So that's gonna be our first cut. So now I'm gonna remove the hide from this portion. This is a method called punching the hide. So when I remove the hide, why I'm punching the hide is because we're in the backcountry. You have to flesh and salt the cape, otherwise it spoils just like the meat. So most people grab here and they rip. If you're near a house or you can freeze it or whatever, that's fine. But in the backcountry, you gotta punch the hide. It's clean skinning, so no meat should be attached to this skin when I'm done. So what I'm doing is I'm coming from the bottom where the meat's thicker in here that attaches, so there's this muscle that actually controls the hair moving up and down. And that goes up the body like this and gets really thin at the top. So what I'm doing is I'm getting underneath the thick part here, punching my arm through and then punching the hide out. That way all the meat is removed from the hide and I don't have to sit there and flesh it all day before salting it. Get their hand in there, flat hand to a fist, and then start working with the muscle group, keeping it attached here to last because it gives you tension. Gonna work around the leg. There's not a lot of meat that connects tissue to the hide here, so we're just gonna keep working around, pulling as we cut, getting all the fascia and other things loose from it. Now it's time to remove the front quarter. So the first step I take is I'm gonna need, once I get this quarter off, I'm gonna need some way to hold it. So I come here and I find the tendon along this bone here. So here's the bone that comes down from the knee, and I see these tendons here. I'm gonna take my knife and make a cut right along there. I'm not cutting any of the meat, but it gives me a good arm hold to hold it from. Then I can work from there. It's sometimes easier to cut this leg off the distal joint when it's attached because there's a little bit of tension. So you find where the joint is, and it's actually lower. So wherever it bends, it's about 1 thumb length up on most animals. You put it cut here, and it's a flat joint that your knife will find, and then you don't have to do any twisting or use a saw or anything like that. Cut through it fairly smooth, like that. So now I'm gonna remove the front shoulder. What I do is I trace the outline of the front shoulder. So the front shoulder is not attached by any joints. It's just attached by fascia and tissue. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna trace the outline of the shoulder, finding the shoulder blade all the way up to the back strap. Then we're gonna cut around and then underneath, and we'll lift. As we lift, we cut, and then it'll be removed, and we've got our handle here. So cutting, just be careful not to cut into the back strap. But if you really want to as well, you can sometimes take the front shoulder off with the neck meat, but we'll do it in 2 different stages this time. So we find the scapula here, put our hand underneath it, start cutting around. Now that the top's removed, we're gonna come down, and then I always like to work up toward the animal's body, throwing all the meat and weight that way. It prevents it from falling into the dirt, so you've got control of it, and it keeps everything clean. The things that destroy meat, like if you talk about meat care, dirt, water, and heat. So the first step is keeping the dirt off of it, keeping it dry and clean. So we have our bags, I'm lifting, and I can do this all by myself because I'm using the weight of the animal to brace the weight of the quarter. I remove it. Now I can stick her in our game bag. There's a lot of different things you can do with the front shoulder. You can turn this whole thing into grind if you'd like. You could cut a few blade steaks out of it, or you could leave some bone-in roast type cuts. We've got the shank, and then even just what would be on a pork, it'd be a Boston butt, which would be this shoulder bone in here down. So there's a lot of different cuts you can do. What we're gonna do with this one is I'll show you the different things you can do with it, and then we'll cut it out and do a lot of grind with it for our burger and our sausage. This is the side that hugs the body. Now, shoulders often get shot, so they might be a little dirtier, have a little bit of bloodshot, but we can trim around that, and then we can start cleaning it up. So I'm gonna clean up the inside first, take off all this excess fascia, connective tissue. The front shoulder has a lot going on. There's a lot of tendons, there's a lot of connective tissue, and there's a lot of muscles going different directions. Generally, this makes the best grind because it's hard to cut solid steaks out of it. Most people end up grinding a lot of the front shoulder, and that's why you get a lot of burger off of a lot of game animals. So that's a good choice. Or you could use it, depending on your cooking styles, as slow cooking. That connective tissue helps it not dry out as much. So I'm gonna show you both methods, maybe cutting it out for burger as well as the steak option and slow cooking options. What I'm gonna do to make it easier to work with is I'm gonna split this front shoulder in half. So you gotta understand the way the bones move. We come down here, we follow this bone, and there's a joint here. It's kind of hard to cut straight across this because the knee area goes forward and then this cuts back. But in the shoulder, there's a flat joint right here. So I'm just gonna cut that off. I'm gonna cut through here, straight down. And if you hit it right, you should just be able to run your knife right through there and remove what would be the shank end from the shoulder end. Now let's work on the shoulder first. I'm gonna clean it up. We've got a bullet hole through here, so I'm just gonna, just like anything else, take the top layer of fascia and everything off, clean it up the best I can. Whatever meat I remove from here will go into the grind, and then the connective tissue will be discarded. What I like to do is pull it back, set my knife, pull it over, pull tension, push forward. So that's why you see this back and forth motion. It just works really well to help get thin layers off and clean this up. And then we can start separating out the muscle groups. So we've got this top portion. This will be our grind. And come in here and quickly remove some of the silver skin with our same cut down, pull out method. Gonna remove some of these extra pieces, just separating out the muscle groups just like we did before. Clean this up a little bit and use that as grind. Cut it in nice pieces for my grinder. Now what we've managed to do is turn a semi-gnarly cut into a nice clean looking piece of meat. On smaller game animals like say a deer, whitetail, mule deer, something like that, I'll actually just leave the bone in this shoulder, vacuum seal this up. It fits perfectly in the crock pot, and you can just slow cook this. The meat comes out a lot more tender than if you took it off the bone, and it's just easier, faster way to deal with these front shoulders. But I'll also show you how to remove the meat from the front shoulder. So if you decide you want some steaks, a blade steak would be this steak right here, obviously over the shoulder blade. Now the shoulder blade has a bone on the outside that kind of splits these two pieces of meat. So it runs down here and then down here. So we can remove those off and we can either cut jerky out of it, we can turn it into blade steaks, we could turn it into grind, whatever. So you can either leave it bone in as a roast, slow cook that, we can cut our blade steaks off of here, or we could jerky this front shoulder. It's really good jerky meat as well. So I'll show you how to do that. We're gonna run the knife right along this bone and then get that blade and work out. We'll just put the top of the shoulder toward me. I'll run down the bone and then I'll just start following that shoulder blade down. Okay, we could cut our blade steaks out of this, cut jerky meat, whatever we want to do. So I'm just going to set that aside and finish boning out this front shoulder, down the other side, pushing out, following along the shoulder blade. This can be confusing the first couple times you do it, especially in the field, but once you figure out where these cuts are made and the shape of that shoulder blade makes it a lot easier. So just understanding the way this shoulder blade works, there's this ridge on the outside of it, the bigger piece on this side, and then the small cut on this side. That'll really help you understand how to take these pieces of meat off, especially if you're deboning it in the field. So we get that. Those two steaks. Now we're going to take the back side off, and this is just flat all the way down, so we can find our cuts and just take the meat off the bone here. So now we've removed the shoulder blade. And I've got it separated out. We've got the back of the shoulder, the small side, and the big side. Grind is always an option. Steaks is another option, so we're gonna cut our steaks. Clean it up a little bit. Grind. Got our blade steaks out of this. Trouble with that is there's a little bit of a connective tissue layer. These are good for breakfast. Another option would be thin slices of jerky. You can go long ways or short ways depending on how you want your jerky. Slice that thin. So we're gonna cut some jerky slices out of this. Great for whole muscle jerky. Quite a few options with the front shoulder. Now we're just gonna go to the second half, which would be the shank side. I'll show you how to cut that up. Out of the front shoulder blade, we've got this awesome pile of grind cut up and ready for our grinder. I'm gonna cool this down. I like to grind it when it's almost semi-frozen, so now I'm gonna grind pretty shortly, so I'm just gonna put this in a bag, stick her in the freezer for a little bit, cool it down, not where it's frozen, but where it's just nice and cold, and then retain that for when I finish everything. Then I'll take all my loose meat and do all my grinding at once. Now we're gonna cut the shank side of the front shoulder. This can be cut many different ways. If you want, you could just cut different pieces of ossobuco type cuts and then cut through the bone, slow cook that. You could also just remove a lot of this for grind. I like a lot of burger. It gets used a lot in my house, so I'm gonna just turn this into burger meat. The option I'm gonna choose today is just gonna be grind. Step one, just as everything else, trim up the silver skin off, trim it up the best you can, retain the meat for the grind pile, and any silver skin or connective tissue will be discarded. Okay, so I took the bottom portion of the shank off. Now we've got this other portion. This lower end of the shank, you can do quite a bit of different things with it. It's really good slow cooked. I would say that this is one of my favorite slow cooked cuts off the animal. A lot of people think it's maybe a trash cut because of all the tendons, but it's really good slow cooked. So you can just retain this on smaller animal, deer, whatever. Saw off here. You can either use a saw or your knife to cut it off and cook this whole, clean up the silver skin off of this. Or you can also just separate out the meat and turn it into grind. So if you want to cut the shank off of the front shoulder, you got to understand that there's a bone that comes up here and then this joint comes back down this way. So it's a little more tricky to cut off than in the shoulder blade. You kind of got to work your knife around the edges. If you know where the joints are, it makes it pretty easy though. Okay. Now we've got our shank portion of the hind quarter deboned. I'm just gonna cut most of this into strips for burger meat once I've got a lot of the silver skin off. Now that we've broken down the front quarter, I'll take that grind and I'll just grind that with everything else, including the hind quarter, the neck meat. All my other loose meat will then be turned into burger, which can be used as just burger or even turned into sausage later on.